Welcome, everybody. We're going to let the participants load in a little bit before we get started, but we're really excited to have you here for our webinar discussing COVID-19, the Great Recession, immigration policy, the U.S. labor market. So, like I said, we'll just give everybody a little bit of time to load in here and get situated, and we'll get started in about a minute or two. Okay, it looks like the numbers or people rolling in has subsided a little bit or slowed. So let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. We are thrilled to be presenting a timely webinar entitled COVID-19 and the Great Resignation, Immigration Policy and the U.S. Labor Market. This is sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration and Section of Civil Rights and Social Justice. This panel is one of many in a series of rapid response webinars. We are actively planning additional programming on a variety of issues, so please visit the American Bar Association. That would be americanbar.org/CRSJ, Charlie, Roger, Sierra, Juliet, for updates on these programs. During today's programming, we encourage you to ask questions of our panelists through the Q&A. Don't use the chat feature, use the Q&A. And we will do our very best to address timely questions as they come up and any leftovers as time permits at the end of the webinar. We will be sharing a recording of this program with everyone who's registered so that you can share it widely with your networks, your friends, watch it at your own time in your leisure. My name is Jonathan Grode. I'm going to be your moderator for today's panel. I am a co-chair of the ABA Labor and Employment Law Section Immigration Committee, and I'm also the managing partner of Green and Spiegel. We're an immigration firm with U.S. headquarters in Philadelphia and offices in Toronto and throughout the United States. We have an awesome group of panelists for you here today. And they're all going to do their own introductions in a few minutes after we kind of set the stage of what's going on and what we're going to be discussing. But I would like to just give a little bit of a shout out to them before we get too far along. We have John Basilisi. He's the Vice President of Immigration Policy from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. John.
Thank you, John.
See you. We got Katie Boston Leary. She's the Director of Nursing Programs from the American Nurses Association. Hi, Katie. Thank you so much for joining us. And we have Ted Hutchinson. He's the Florida State Director of FWD.US. I always say forward.us, but I don't want to mispronounce it. Yeah, all right, cool. I got that. We were going to have a fourth panelist, Rebecca Shee, the executive director of the American Business Immigration Coalition. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us today, but I think we will be able to cover her topics and perspectives aptly with the rest of our distinguished panelists. So everybody's going to do a little bit of an introduction, talk a little bit about their organization, but before we get there, let's get in the right mindset about what we're talking about. I think it's really, really important to understand that we're talking about the labor market. You go and talk to anybody at any office, anywhere in the United States, and frankly, anywhere around the world, and they're going to say, we need help, we need workers. There is a labor shortage in practically every single industry. As of May 3rd, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, there was 11.5 million open jobs in the United States, 11.5. 1.9 million in trade, transportation, and utilities, 2.1 million in professional and business services, 1.9 million in healthcare, which Katie's going to really hit on, 1.5 million in accommodations and food services, and even 1 million federal and state government jobs. I mean, by region, it is dramatic, with the South actually having the most openings at 4.1 million, and even everywhere else in the United States is around 2 million open jobs. In fact, there are two open jobs in the United States right now for every person that is listed as unemployed. And if you compare that to March 2020, right before the pandemic took hold, there was 5 unemployed people per job opening. So it's completely flipped during this pandemic and with the Great Resignation. Now, when it comes to immigrants, net migration to the United States, the Cato Institute estimates there's between 2.4 million and 4.8 million less immigrants in the US cumulatively from 2017 to the present. So we're going back to the Trump policy, taking us through the pandemic. We've lost an additional approximately 2.4 to 4.8 million people. That is very, very, very significant. And that is really the effect that we're dealing with. Now, some people want to talk about what is the cause. Is it policy? Is it law? Or is it logistics? And this is what we're really going to delve into before we talk about solutions. But one of the big problems is visa processing times. People that do have approved petitions that are legally able to enter the United States, it's just taking a really, really, really long time. Like, for example, if you wanted to book a regular visa appointment in Toronto, Ontario, which is a popular place for third country nationals to process, the wait time is 276 calendar days just to get an appointment. Now, that's a little bit egregious, but if you look at places like Delhi, and we pull a lot of workers from India, it's 236 days. London is 80 days. And there are places in the world where it's a little bit better. But this is exasperating the aspect, of why we have a labor shortage, because people can't get here even when they are migrating legally. And then we have the issue with numerical limitations. The H-1B visa is the most significantly used standard working visa. There's a cap of 85,000 of them annually. It's open in March is when you apply, and the selections are made at the end of the month for April. For those 85,000 spots, there was 483,000 filings made. If you look at some of our low-skilled visas, H-2B category, which is for temporary seasonal workers, there's 66,000 of those available anyway. They're split into 2 lots for sort of a winter and a summer season. Both of those were met almost immediately. Took a little bit longer for winter season. But for March, which is our big summer season filings, they had, let me see what was happening here, 140,000 filings for 33,000 spots. In fact, it was so egregious that they added another 35,000 openings, which Congress is able to do and the agency is able to do. So, that is what we're seeing there. And then you have the effect of policy. What are the administrations doing? What is Congress doing? If we go back historically to George W. Bush, and John and I were rapping about this a little bit earlier, there was a push for bilateral free trade agreements. We entered into agreements with Chile, Singapore, Australia. Those all had visas associated with them. There was a push towards the importance of trade and development of migration. Obama administration, and I know, John, you know this personally, and maybe we'll talk a little bit, but there was a massive attempt to get comprehensive immigration reform through the Senate that in 2013 that didn't pass. And then Obama did a series of executive orders to help with migration, DACA, H-4 workers, authorization. So there was like this understanding in both parties that immigration was an important aspect of the labor force. With Trump, everything got turned on its head. And we're even talking pre-pandemic. There was a lot of a push of saying foreign nationals are not good for the economy. There was Buy American, Hire American. They had massive increases in requests for evidence. And during the pandemic itself, an executive order halting nearly all employment-based non-immigrant visa issuance. And if you look at those numbers that we talked about from the Cato Institute from 2017 to the present, you see a lot of that being driven by policy changes. And while the Biden administration has rolled back some of the Trump era practices, end of Buy American, Hire American, and reducing some of the logistical hurdles associated with administrative processing, we're still facing ourselves with this extreme labor shortage because of the totality of the circumstances. So we've talked about the effect. We know a little bit about the cause, which we're going to delve into deeper. But today we hope between this panel discussion to start talking about the solution. And with that, I would like to introduce John Basilisi one more time to give a little bit of an introduction about himself, his organization, and then we'll pass it along to Katie and then Ted.
Thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here today. I want to thank the American Bar Association for inviting me to participate on this panel. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is a trade association that represents businesses across the country in all sectors of all sizes. And one, if not the biggest complaint that we hear, and it's not just me in the immigration work that we do, but I hear it from my colleagues that work on energy issues. I hear it from my colleagues that work on your traditional labor and employment issues. Every company that we hear from is concerned about having enough workers to meet their needs. They can't grow, they can't take on new work. In the worst cases, if they can't find enough workers, they either have to downsize or they have to delay buying new equipment. All this stuff, when you add it all up, it harms the ability of the economy to grow. You talked about seasonal employment issues, John. Like in those particular issues, when you're talking about a business whose season is either the winter or the summer, and when they're capped out, it doesn't just hurt the business owner. It hurts the American workers that are employed by that company full time, year round. Someone who's going to get a promotion isn't getting one. Someone who was, part of, the third team they had in a landscape crew. Guess what? That third team's gone. That American employee now has to find a job. It really is heartbreaking to see just an inability to really get things done in a timely manner have these types of impacts on companies. What the chamber does on immigration, we are in for a penny, we are in for a pound when it comes to reform. If it's, we're working on regulatory and administrative changes, we're all for things that help companies meet their workforce needs. When it comes to legislative pushes in Congress, I won't, beat around the bush. It is slow going, but there are opportunities for us to make progress. And, the H-2B issues, this was one thing with the change in the administration. I was worried about this when Trump came to office, that H-2Bs were going to be harmed. And, we were able to make the case to not just the Trump administration, but also congressional Republicans who, in various contexts, don't exactly, they're not singing off of our hymnal when it comes to immigration reform, but they got it on H-2Bs and H-2As, to be frank.
And frankly, that was the one area where we saw expansion during the Trump administration.
And it was when Biden came in office, we were worried that, the pro organized labor movement folks would sit there and say, you can't keep doing this for H-2Bs. But the thing is, H-2B and H-2A, there's a lot of, it's tied to what you see on the border happening these days. And if you don't have the types of, whether it's your green card programs or your temporary worker programs, if they don't meet the needs of the economy, and there's still job opportunities here, and when you're looking at folks coming from Mexico or Honduras or Nicaragua or El Salvador, you're talking about pay premiums that are factors of 10, 15, 20. Like you're talking about 20 times the earnings you can get here in the United States than if you stayed home doing the job that you do at home. And, there's always going to be a draw. And we're going to have to have a system that functions properly and orderly and humanely, or we're going to see more of the same. And when you let problems manifest and just they metastasize, they typically don't go away on their own. The only way that I could see this going away on its own is if the economy takes a nosedive, and no one wants that to happen. So we've got to start, as a country, we really need to start looking at these issues And one of my good friends, Teresa Cardinal Brown at Bipartisan Policy Center, I got to give her credit for this. Like, I want to make immigration boring again. We have to do this in a way where we can look at and have a cold, hard analysis of what our policies are, how they are failing the national interest, and what we need to do to get them to meet our national interests. And
wow.
I look forward to the rest of the panel, and thank you for having me again.
Yeah, man, and we're going to dig in on those topics, and I think that really outlines it well. To switch gears a little bit, Katie, you're kind of boots on the ground in a specific industry. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Sure, I'll start by talking about my organization, then I'll talk about myself. But first and foremost, thank you for having me. My name is Katie Boston Leary. I actually work for the American Nurses Association. The American Nurses Association is an organization, a nonprofit that represents the interests of the nation's 4.3 million registered nurses. We advance the profession by fostering high standards of nursing practice, promoting a safe and ethical work environment, bolstering the health and wellness of nurses, and advocating on their issues. And not only nurses' issues, but issues that impact the public at large. And we also are all about promoting quality healthcare for all. Nurses represent the largest workforce sector in the world and in the US. And it's a group that has a lot of issues, as you know, right now, particularly with what's been exposed during the pandemic or what the pandemic has worsened. My role with ANA is I'm the director of nursing programs. I oversee nursing practice and work environment. I work on specific issues like building standards of practice for nurses with a team. Of course, I don't do it by myself. Workplace violence, which is very important. That was very evident during the pandemic, but it's always been an issue for nurses. That's something that we advocate for, better laws to protect nurses. Safe patient handling, I'm staff on the commission to address. We have a national commission that we partner with other ethnic minority organizations to address racism in nursing, and we just did a major landmark study on that. And I oversee Healthy Nurses, Healthy Nation, which is an initiative for nurses to be well, because nursing is one of the unhealthiest or most hazardous professions out there. So we advocate for nurses to take care of themselves. As you know, nursing is a hot topic in the news, particularly over the last couple of years. We advocate for a number of things that nurses are pushing for. There's a march going on in DC today, which is going to clearly impact commutes for a number of folks today. But it's nurses really pretty much adding their voices to what's important to them, which is something that nurses have been fighting for since 1873, better working conditions, better pay, and for them to be kept safe by their employers.
Thank you so much, Katie. We're really excited to hear from you further. Last but not least, Ted, you want to talk to us a little bit about Forward and what you're doing down in the great state of Florida?
Absolutely. Thank you, John, for having me, and hello to all our other panelists. So Forward.us is a political nonprofit national organization, but we have satellite offices in different states. I'm based here in Miami, Florida, but I have counterparts in Texas, New York, Colorado, and Georgia as well. We have two main verticals here at Forward, criminal justice reform, and then obviously immigration. Forward is relatively young compared to organizations like the Chamber or the Nurses Association. We've only been around since 2013, but we've been in the comprehensive immigration reform fight since then. I joined the organization back in 2016, right before the election of Trump. And so that sort of was a surprise, right, to a lot of folks. And we sort of had to recalibrate, how we were going to approach this administration. And so Forward, like I said, our North Star is comprehensive immigration reform, but we work on smaller issues that fall within the immigration umbrella. So it could be DACA, TPS, international entrepreneur rule, H-4 visas, H-2B visas, things like that. So it's a full-hearted approach to immigration issues, and then of course, we deal with state issues as well too. And so I run our legislative agenda here in the state of Florida. Like I said, I've been with Forward since 2016, but I got my start doing immigration work when I worked on the Hill for Sheila Jackson Lee, who's on the immigration subcommittee. And so My first assignment, I remember, was to read her entire bill, all 400 pages. So, I took a crash course in immigration that summer. Actually was there when George Bush and Ted Kennedy tried to pass CIR back in 2007. That sort of all collapsed. And so, man, it's been a while. It's been a rough fight. Man. Been a lot of up and downs. I think you guys all remember back in 2013, we almost got close, and then Eric Cantor lost his primary race, and then that sort of put immigration reform to the side. And so, we're constantly, whether it's through a democratically controlled Congress or in a bipartisan fashion, we've got our eyes on the North Star. And so, whether it's at the state level trying to find relief for the undocumented community, or at the federal level, obviously, that's what we aim for. So
great. Well, I mean, I think we got great perspective and great experience. It sounds, Ted, like you and John were kind of circling around the same stuff about a decade ago. So maybe we can take a little bit of a trip down memory lane as we look to potential legislative solutions that might be afoot. But John,
I imagine Ted and I share a lot of the same battle scars too.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's what it's all about. So, John, let's start with you. And look, feel free. Everybody can chat in. This is a dialogue. And again, I just want to remind you, we got that Q&A open. We are going to try to pepper in questions that are coming in. I see a couple of questions have already come in. That was my brief pause. But so here we go, John. In your opinion, and you heard me roll off some statistics during the opening, but in your opinion, what are the main factors that are leading to this dramatic labor shortage?
John, there's a lot, but there's a few key ones. I think, not to give the pandemic more credit than it deserved, but the lot of the issues stemmed from that. When you have an economy shut down for all intents and purposes for an extended period of time, and you have an administration pursuing policies trying to basically wall itself off from the virus, you're going to have issues. You look at what happened. We sued. The chamber sued quite a bit. We actually won in court. But even when we won, they weren't necessarily Pyrrhic victories, but it was tough because you're dealing with a situation where the State Department, a lot of the older consular officers, once the pandemic happened, they're like, I'm retiring, or they quit and they came back home. They're like, I'm not being abroad and away from my family during all this. You had DHS.
And just to add to that point, I think what added to that a little bit was the fact that there was a hiring freeze because of where the economy was going. So these consular officers were resigning. We're talking about the Great Resignation. There was a Great Resignation of consular officers. But there was no mechanism to fill those roles, which is why I think you see those long processing times we were talking about.
And they're still struggling to try to get back to normal. If there's one thing that I hear from companies time and again is, I'm trying to get an appointment for a visa interview. Try to take advantage of the visa interview waivers for this individual. State Department will let them. Still need an interview, and the interview is almost a year away. How am I supposed to meet my workforce needs if I got to wait a year to bring the guy or gal I need in now? It doesn't work. I think you also need to look at not just the pandemic itself, but what did it cause? You had a lot of people. There were folks that, given what happened after the pandemic, childcare became a very big issue. And you had a lot of individuals who used to be in the workforce just say, you know what? Life before the pandemic, I don't want to go back to that. There's certain things I want to leave behind.
And John, maybe, on that point, when we talk about the amount of percentage of people unemployed, the unemployment rate, does that capture everybody who's not working? I mean, I think there's a little bit of a misconception around that concept.
There's all sorts of numbers that DOL comes up with when it does its monthly employment report. The unemployment rate is now below 4%. And I think Ted would appreciate this because back in 2013 in January, when my old boss got involved in the Gang of Eight, unemployment was at 8%. It was either 8 or 7.8%. You're dealing with a different beast. It would be interesting to see if you had a push for immigration reform now, with the type of momentum that you had in 2013 today, because there are so many more people that are they're seeing, like I see this with my own eyes. The company that the hardware store down the street, like they have to close early because they don't have someone to work late shifts. The pool that we all would go to, they don't have enough lifeguards, so they're only open on certain days and for closed hours. Hotels, they had restaurants closed for most of the year until the summer comes. Like they're finally seeing, like, how does this workforce shortage manifest itself in the things that I see on a daily basis? How does it impact me? They're finally starting to feel it. The other thing is, I mean, you can't underscore the policies that also helped get us to where we were. Prior to 2020, you had the RFEs raining down like manna from heaven. You had the contracts and itineraries memo. You had the computer program memo. You had all of these things that happened. It was like a death by 1,000 cuts to try to like.
That's funny that you say that, because another guy from Commerce used the same expression for how Trump attacked the legal immigration system.
Anyway, there's a ton of gears in the system. Let's just throw sand in each one of them. And the more they did, it slowed everything down to a halt. And particularly in 2017, you saw it. It's interesting when you look at the data. You saw a drop in the number of unauthorized crossings in 2017. And they started to level off and come up again in 2018. As the economy started to hum, though, in 2018 and 2019, you saw crossings, like, they were starting to go up again. They fell off like a cliff in 2020 when everything was shut down due to the pandemic. But, every time the economy gets going, you see the number of people that want to cross the border without inspection, it goes up. This is how supply and demand works. And those laws are going to trump any laws that we can craft to try to prevent that from happening. It's, 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. So it's one of those things where it's a confluence of factors that got us to this situation. And we didn't get here overnight. And to get out of this pickle that we're in, it's not going to happen overnight either. Rome wasn't built in a day, and making an immigration system that functions properly isn't going to happen in overnight either.
So when we look at like change and factoring in change, you can have executive orders, which we became very comfortable with digesting during the Trump administration and even before that.
Mm-hmm.
And we have policy memoranda from USCIS or from a different, from CBP or a different agency. We have and regulatory changes, leaving Congress out of it just for a minute. What can the administration do, in your opinion, or what should this administration be doing to address a situation which is very, very acute?
Not to dodge your question, but I think you can't avoid Congress here, because it gets back to one of the factors as to why we're in this situation. It's because Congress stopped doing its job. Congress is supposed to legislate. Congress has plenary powers over immigration and naturalization. They're the ones that have to create the rules. Any administration of any party can try to tinker around the edges as much as they want, but we need like whole-scale reforms. Not that you need to do everything all together in one fell swoop, but you need to have major structural reform to how our immigration system operates. And having that happen over the course of, I guess it's over 30 years now. The last time you had real meaningful reform to the immigration system was 1990 with MAC 90.
Yeah.
Ever since then, it's, you had 1996 with Perwara, and you had IRA passed there. You had a lot of things passed in the wake of 9/11. You had
American Competitiveness Act of 21st century.
Yeah, like all those things. There were, but you would always it was like having a car. You take it in to get serviced. They stopped doing that. You saw an effort in 2006. You saw an effort in 2007. You saw an effort in 2013. And when they fail doing something big, they just throw their hands up and say, "Oh, well, I guess we can't do anything." And I mean, the one thing to get back to your question, so what the administration should be doing, number one thing they should be doing is they really start working with Congress on this. And I understand some people may look at me and say I'm in la la land, but that has to happen at some point. Because if it doesn't, these problems aren't going to get better. And, it's a bipartisan thing. The pox on both houses for an inability for the folks that are in charge in the executive branch to, use their bully pulpit, try to say, listen, we have to get something done, and it's got to be done in a way where each side has to give. And we've never been able to hit that sweet spot. But aside from, talking to Congress and trying to get, because right now you have a situation where Senator Durbin, Senator Cornyn, Senator Tillis, Senator Padilla, they're sitting down having talks about what it is we can do to move forward. From what I have gathered, clearly there's going to be an awful lot on border enforcement. They're talking about asylum reform as well, but they're also talking about legalizing dreamers. They're also talking about meeting your seasonal workforce needs in a real permanent way, as opposed to having to go through the appropriation cycle year in and out to get some extra visas. These are the types of things that the White House should be getting behind, saying, listen, we're here to help you. We're here to help make space. Because at the end of the day, it's going to require presidential leadership. And I wasn't around in 2006, 2007. I was in college and I was heading to law school. And by the time I got to 2013, I was in the Rubio office. But the one thing that you were missing in all three of those situations was the ability for the president to exercise effective leadership. And at the time, President Bush, I met him at an event not too long ago, and what he told me was, it's a shame that had we had more political capital in the wake of what was going on in Iraq at the time, I think we could have gotten it done. That was our problem. That his words. But in terms of 2013, at the time, given how polarizing President Obama was to Republicans, it was decided, listen, I'm going to stay out of this. You folks in the Senate, you work this out. And I think that was one thing that was lacking, because if you had someone in the White House who could, call his side to task when they were being unreasonable, and also do the same for Republicans, say, listen, this is a negotiation. We know this is a tough give for you, but we're also going to give you that. Like, that never happened. And without that, to try to work on those types of bipartisan negotiations, that's the only way you're going to get lasting change. Because you want to tinker around the edges with administrative changes, and they're great. We'll take good administrative changes, but they can be changed like that. Yeah. And for companies, the key for them, and it's not just an immigration issue, it's any other issue that's important to them, they need certainty for planning, not just in the short term, not just in the next few months, but the next few years, the next decade. That's what they need. Yeah. If they don't have certainty, and you're waffling back and forth from here to there with the spectrums, every time the White House changes hands, it's tough to get what you need done.
Well, I agree with you there. Businesses crave predictability, and that's irrespective of immigration or other policies where it comes to tariffs or taxes or however you're manipulating the system through executive orders or policies. That predictability is critical for planning and costing and all of those aspects. There was an interesting question that came in on the Q&A here. It says, there's a narrative which places the blame on immigrant workers for the lack of jobs which pay living wages that enable people to care for their basic needs. With historic low unemployment, lower immigration rates, and the ubiquitous complaint of increasing difficulty to meet these basic employment needs, how do you envision galvanizing this impact to educate those about the importance of immigrants to our system?
Well, anonymous attendee, I wish you weren't anonymous, because this is a fantastic question. If I had the answer to this, I'd be a much richer person. Working in politics, it's a slog. The what worries me is if this opportunity comes and goes, and because the economy is not just going to stand still, it'll go up, it'll go down. But it is beyond frustrating when you're trying to persuade people to see like immigration benefits the United States. Employment-based green cards benefit the United States. The H-1B program, the L-1 program, the E program, the O, the P, these all benefit the United States. I don't know what it is about. It's just, I think it's a desire among some. They just don't want to compete. And when it boils down to that, so like, they're trying to ensure that using the levers of power to ensure that somehow they get some sort of benefit and the folks they're competing with don't. I wish I had a better answer, because you can convince some people, and it's data. Usually, I'll use this as an example, because I thought when I left the Rubio office to come to the chamber, the one thing that I would never see success on was H-2Bs. For various and sundry reasons, when the Obama administration and the chamber and many other business groups were in ongoing litigation with the Obama administration for many years on their H-2B rule, and when they finally shut down the H-2B program in the wake of litigation after the George W. Bush era H-2B rule was ruled invalid, they shut the program down. At the time, the H-2B stakeholders weren't exactly the best aligned. There were rifts between industries here and there over various and sundry petty things, to be frank, but it galvanized everybody. And it was just that exogenous shock of everybody being told, guess what? Store's closed. No more H-2B program. And we were all like, no, that's not happening. You saw this momentum that happened at the grassroots level. A lot of small businesses were saying, listen, like, I'm not gonna be able to process my seafood. I'm not gonna be able to engage in my landscape business. We're not gonna be able to, change tile roofs on houses in Scottsdale. Like, various and sundry industries that relied upon the H-2B program to thrive. That's what it took. And, I would hope that the current situation we find ourselves in could be used as a catalyst for that. It's not like it's not the punch that shock had. It's just, this is bad. It affects everybody. And there's lots of factors that have contributed to this problem. And there's lots of policy solutions that can help solve it.
Yeah.
It's not one of those things where like, it's just the immigration solution that will solve this problem.
And
go ahead, John.
Just to kind of put a perspective just for the audience out there, H-2B is a temporary seasonal visa for non-agricultural workers. So it's based on seasons. It's non-agriculture. It's like filling gaps at hotels, the roofers, the landscapers, those types of occupations that John's referring to. Ted, I know we're going to get to your segment in a little bit, but I really do like this question about the narrative and blame and orientation. Does Forward have messaging that they put out on this front that you guys talk about, or, especially in Florida, the state where you are? I'm sure this is something that comes up regularly.
Right. So, I think John can, as a former employee of Marco Rubio, can understand that, we have a misinformation problem down here in South Florida, in Florida, right? And then so, a lot of the narratives that you hear around immigration and you hear around, employment opportunities is just wrong, right? And so, like, one of the issues that we dealt with here in Florida, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, we did an E-Verify bill down here in Florida, right? And, we actually commissioned a study to talk about the impact of that E-Verify bill. And if it were passed, the state of Florida was going to lose $3.2 billion in tax revenue, right? And just the entire state of Florida, right? We're talking billions of dollars, right? And then if you broke it down by region, South Florida, with a large population of immigrants, was going to lose, millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue as well, too. And it impacted specific industries like agriculture. It impacted hospitality, the hospitality industry as well, too. And so one of the things that we do a lot here at Forward is that we try to uplift directly impacted folks people who are being impacted by these policies, to demonstrate that, these are real people, right? Like these are, real people who are, working in different industries that impact your life, and impact, things like this, the supply chain, as well too, so, we're big on storytelling. We're big on, pushing back on a lot of the that's out there, and like a lot of my effort is put towards that, and so I think, for me, it's really about, frustration, right? And just to sort of put some numbers to some things that John mentioned, right? Like you have, I think, a green card backlog with 4 million people in it, right? Yeah. Within that green card backlog, 1 million of those people are employment-based, visas, right? And so these are people who, like, for the most part, are already living in the United States, have lived here for years, right? And like they earn a good wage and whatnot, right? But they're still waiting on their green card. And what's frustrating for, I would imagine, a lot of practitioners, the people in your audience, right, is that the United States only issues 104,000 or 140,000, I think, employment-based visas per year, right? Even though you have 1 million people who, highly skilled people as well too, right? Who can potentially come here and fill some of those gaps, And so, for me, it's the misinformation combined with the frustration of the entire inefficiency of our immigration system.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And it's interesting, like compared to other Western and developed countries, we have the lowest percentage of immigration based on employment sponsorship of any of those countries. We are much more a family reunification driven system. And I think emphasizing the need for workers without decreasing the number of family immigration, because there's a lot of backlogs and issues there as well, is something that should be explored. Before we start moving on to some other segments, one thing that I do think we've been talking about in some of the questions on the message on the Q&A have been hinting at is this, we're talking about skilled workers, and, we discussed some of the issues with the seasonal workers, but, John, there's year-round occupations that don't require a degree, don't require a heap of training, where those industries are really, really lacking. And to me, this is like a root of why we have such a problem at the southern border and why we have such a problem with people that don't have status. But can you talk a little bit about the recognition of people on the Hill, what Congress is doing for these year-round industries like dairy farmers or mushroom growers, where they're not having access to talent?
John, you bring up a good point, and you bring two ag examples into this, but retail is another one. Truckers, the trucking companies, same thing. And this was one of those things that we recognized in 2013 is if you don't have a program that allows workers to come in temporarily for year-round work, there will be a massive cohort of industries that will still, they won't be able to meet their workforce needs. That hasn't changed. What has changed is the courage among any member of Congress to try to put forward a bill that does this in a bipartisan fashion. And I want to give.
Sorry, John, but I was just going to say, I think that's the real frustrating part, because we have a lot of discussion and dialogue around what do we do with people that don't have status. In fact, one of the questions was, do we know whether or not the size of unauthorized people in the United States has increased or decreased during the pandemic? And we talk about, do we give them status? Do we not? Do we go heavy enforcement? But nobody's talking about why these people are coming here in the first place and why we don't have a mechanism for them to do it legally. And I get really passionate about this particular topic because I think there's a solution. But to your point,
and just there's a lack of courage amongst Congress to actually address that type of issue. And I want to give credit to there are some members in Congress, Lloyd Smucker being one of them, who's in your backyard in Pennsylvania, who it used to be the Workforce for an Expanding Economy Act. I think he's changed the name of it when he reintroduced it this Congress. But we've supported this bill for a long time, and it goes to there's a group of people, there's a group of industries that aren't covered in H-2A, they're not covered in H-2B, they're not covered in any of the white collar immigration programs. The only thing they have is the EB3 other worker category for green cards, and there's your problem. Without that issue being solved for, and without the the future, we always call it the future flow. Like without some sort of mechanism to address the future flow of migrants, you will find yourself in this problem later on if you don't solve it. And that was between in 2013, and I'd like to know what Ted has to say about this when he was working in Sheila Jackson Lee's office. But like in 2013, we were working on S744, H1Bs, and that were the two toughest topics to discuss because it's very emotional. The advocacy groups, you know, they cover the whole range of the spectrum in terms of what they want, what they don't want. You have the restrictionist crowd on the right. You have organized labor on the left, who find themselves to be strange bedfellows when it comes to ensuring that American workers are, in their view, adequately protected. You know, more often than not, their ideas of adequate protection means we have programs that don't function and that employers can't use. And it's a struggle. It really is a struggle. And that's why people don't have the courage to, because it's the toughest nut to crack.
Well, John, I thank you. And I know we're going to get to talk a little bit more about policy and change, but I want to switch it over to Katie a little bit to talk about the effects that we're actually seeing on the ground. And one of the most impacted industries during the entire pandemic has been healthcare, and in particular, nursing. And we'll talk a little bit about immigration policy regarding nursing, and I'll fill in a few gaps for Katie. But Katie, just on a very bare bones level, how has the pandemic shaped the nursing industry?
Yeah, thanks, John. And this has been a very intriguing. I'm learning a lot listening to you, Ted and John, about immigration policy. But yeah, healthcare definitely has been impacted by what's been called the Great Resignation. A study by health leaders indicates that, and several studies indicates that healthcare has lost 20% of its workforce as a result of this exodus. And in those numbers, we've lost 30% of our nurses. And for the first time in 40 years, we've seen a decrease in the overall nursing workforce of about 4%. People would think that that is mostly the seasoned older nurses saying enough and leaving the workforce, but data actually indicates it's our younger nurses, the nurses that recently entered the workforce, that are saying no mas and leaving. So all those numbers are very concerning, and it's an indication that there's been a deferred meaningful maintenance that should have occurred years ago, over the years in healthcare, that has led us to where we are today. Not to say that it could have been, you know, there's things could have been prevented where the pandemic would not have landed us where we are today, because the pandemic opened all of our eyes. We've all had different types of reckoning moments since, you know, we've had to stay home for a while and rethink our priorities. But we're seeing people really starting to shift. So what we're seeing in retail and some of those other industries is impacting healthcare. And one of the interesting things that we're seeing also is because salaries have lagged for so long in nursing, retail is starting to catch up with nursing salaries, particularly for people entering the field. So a lot of employers have had to recalculate the base salaries for nurses. And again, there's a lot of catching up to do, because merit increases over the years has been meaningless as hospital margin percentage increases have decreased. And a lot of hospital CEOs, which is where a lot of nurses practice, and that's not all the only place they practice, but where about 60-some% of our nurses practice, hospital CEOs have been trying to seek increases from payers to make up the difference for what they're paying in labor costs, and payers are saying, no, you can figure it out. So it's been a challenging situation, and it's not just for nurses, but a lot of workers that have left the healthcare field are very important professions and professionals that help nurses, where without them, the workload is even more taxing for nurses to just do the simplest things.
Yeah, and it's interesting on the wage and the people that are leaving the actual profession, and your comment about retail is interesting as well. And I know that immigration, and I know this might not be your bailiwick, but just to kind of get it out there. So immigration and nursing is an odd thing. And John and Ted, if you want to chime in a little bit, you can. But the Department of Labor has deemed nursing to be a shortage occupation in the United States. Normally, when you go to get somebody a green card, you got to test the labor market, see if there's any minimally qualified people. If there's no minimally qualified people, you can fill that role permanently with a foreign national. That's the way it works. Pretty simple concept. They say for nurses, you don't even need to bother testing the labor market. We know there's a shortage. It's okay, go forward and you can file for these people. Unfortunately, Katie, that process to get a green card for a nurse who's based overseas can take upwards of 2 years because of all the issues that we've been discussing. Employers don't typically say, I need somebody 2 years from now, let's start a recruitment, right? If you want to get them a temporary visa, there's nothing really available because nursing, some of the occupations are okay. There was a memo about it, but for the most part, if you have an RN, you don't need a bachelor's degree to become a nurse in most jurisdictions. Without there being a bachelor's degree requirement, it doesn't activate some of the regular professional employment visa classifications. So there's a real disconnect there on immigration policy as it relates to nurses. And John, I don't know if you can comment on that, or Ted, if you're familiar with these issues, but.
I can, and I'd like to hear Katie's thoughts on this a little bit, because these nursing issues, nursing and physical therapists too, these are issues that predated COVID in terms of being a problem, and not just for foreign nationals doing these jobs, but just finding anyone to do these jobs. And it's interesting because before like COVID became the big thing, prior to that, people forget it was the opioid epidemic, and not enough attention was paid to the fact that when you didn't have enough nursing professionals, you didn't have enough physical therapists, when a construction worker hurts their back at a job site, like really hurt their back really bad, the I-beam fell on them, like something like that. Like they need the nursing care, they need the physical therapy to get themselves, their body back in working shape. But if you don't have the nurses who can do this, you don't have the access to the physical therapists that you need to do this, often, like it's always a sad story when you hear this, but like what I would hear from our members in the healthcare industry is like, you get people that just like, here's a prescription. Here's some pain pills. This is the only thing I can offer you because we don't have the services near us. And you definitely would get this in more rural areas of the country. But that would be the story you'd hear. And that's something that, why don't we have a system that functions well, that allows those healthcare providers to meet their workforce needs? Even with all of the benefits that the system itself provides for those seeking green cards, like why don't we have something for H-1Bs, or why don't we have some other sort of temporary worker program that allows folks to get in here quicker? So these needs stop going unmet sooner rather than later. It's just, it's sad because these are problems that are eminently avoidable, but for Congress not doing their job.
Katie, I know it's not 100% what you deal with, but I mean, do you have any thoughts on this particular topic? Because obviously it's.
So the one thing I want to make sure is, I want to make a couple of things clear is we definitely know immigration and being able to source talent from overseas or global markets is definitely a strategy that a number of organizations are taking, particularly now because of the fact that we are losing a lot of top talent. Bringing in nurses from overseas allows you to have someone from a skills perspective that can almost immediately come in and start working, right? Compared to a new grad that will have to go through transition to practice and nurse residency programs and everything else. Because of how complex this process is, particularly with dealing with immigration and green cards and things like that, a lot of employers don't engage in this. They actually work with companies that do this for a living. So there are a number of companies that actually have processes where this is their business, what they do. They have relationships on the Hill, and they advocate, they lobby, they have a process to have almost a parallel processing approach to, while even though there's a 2-year wait, there are folks that are actually well in the process where they're able to turn things around, and they have a pipeline of talent that they're bringing in, where when they do present a lot of workers from overseas to nurses from overseas to employers, they've done all the legwork, right? They have an immigration type legal team. They're doing all the paperwork. So all you have to worry about is a contract with them, and you pay them for the folks to start. They even, in some cases, help them with acculturation, with teaching them the language, if it's not their first language, helping them get a car, housing, and things like that. So very few employers do this on their own. They work with companies that this is their book of business, this is what they do. But what we do want to say is that with the global nursing shortage, which is ANA's position, is that immigration is not the solution to address what we're facing. It's one of many, and we understand why it's important.
One of the things that I know you've spent a lot of time, Katie, from one of our planning sessions, you've done a lot of work regarding discrimination.
Yeah.
And especially discrimination in the nursing industry as it relates to employers. And one of the panelists kind of mentioned, there's a lot of documented abuse and discrimination for those that engage in the visa program, especially those that might have their visas tied to a specific employer. How do you see the discrimination aspect impacting the want and desire to enter the industry, remain in the industry, and frankly, have like a good quality of life within this particular field?
Yeah, I do think for people that are immigrating, it is a tough transition. We actually just heard a story from one of our team members at ANA that she shared her story coming to the US and how it was challenging for her, and how it's a compounding of issues. You miss your family, you miss your surroundings. A lot of what you used to eat is not there. And then you're in this space where people don't understand you, and they see that you're different, and they treat you immediately like you're a pariah, and how you have to navigate that for the first time. Because, for a number of folks, particularly folks that are immigrating, they're not minorities where they're from. So they may hear about what's happening in the US, but when you experience it, it's a whole other thing. Do we prepare them for what they expect to see, not only from patients, but in some cases their managers or even their peers? And we have data that whether you're immigrating or just being a nurse of color, you experience some level of racism, and we have data, and discrimination. And we have data that supports that from a survey that we just completed. But for a lot of these families that actually are part of these programs that are being brought into the US from overseas, they're bringing their families. And some institutions have done a good job of doing international days and welcoming folks, because I think, to John's point, there are a number of, prior to the pandemic, a number of these nurses that are being brought in. We're in the ruralest of places, right? In South Dakota, in Iowa, and in the Midwest, where they probably have never seen someone my color or as dark as me, and they have to deal with that. So in some cases, they're bringing their children who has to go to school that are also going through that same level of racism and discrimination, and that compounds what a lot of these workers have to deal with. So there's so many issues regarding racism and discrimination as it relates to bringing people from overseas because they don't speak the language or they look different. But we're also seeing very concerning stories from nurses of color that when you hear these stories, because we did listening sessions, you think that we're in the 60s, which is unacceptable.
Can you give like some specific examples? I mean, I know we're talking about immigration, but I think this is an important topic to address because it is affecting the labor market.
Sure. So I'll start with the data and then I'll tell you a story. So the study that we just completed, and we just completed it this year, half of the nurses that completed the survey, and we had about, I think 20-some thousand nurses that that complete the survey, nearly half of nurses say that there's a lot of racism in nursing. 63% of nurses say that they've personally experienced this in the workplace. 56% of nurses say that racism in the workplace has negatively impacted their well-being. 57% of nurses said that they challenged racism in the workplace, but only 64% and 64% of nurses who challenge racism said that their efforts really resulted in no change. And overall, 3 out of 4 nurses who responded to the survey said that they have witnessed racism in the workplace. So this is very concerning, because you would think that once you complete a nursing degree, you're a saint and you don't do those things, because some of this is not just coming from patients, it's coming from peers and managers. One story that I'll never forget, I'll tell you 2 quick ones, is a nurse who was taking care of a patient where the patient asked for this nurse to be switched out. And this nurse is one of their best nurses on the unit, and she's Black. And the manager switched her out. And she knew that she was experiencing something with this patient, but she was dedicated to the cause. And when she asked her manager what the issue was in terms of her patient, her manager said, "Oh, don't worry about it. The patient's really concerned because at night when they just see your teeth, it scares them." Right? Another is a nurse who, because she wasn't assimilating, if you will, she works in the South, but these are not just isolated to our rural southern parts of the country. She had a situation where, because she wasn't engaging in the potlucks and some of the social things that her peers were doing, because, we, in the Black community, we tend to, there are a couple of things that our mothers tell us, like, don't eat everybody's food and keep your business to yourself. And because she was doing some of those things and not necessarily engaging and sharing about herself, she was not seen as a team player. And she found that some of the nurses were actually changing the drips and some of the settings on her equipment when she wasn't there. And she was so scared, she would never go to lunch or take a break because of that fear. So there's so many examples of like that we continue to see in 2022 that you would not imagine is happening during this time, given all that we've done and become as human beings, evolving through time and learning, which is really concerning. So just imagine you add to that, right, with what you find when you come from a different country and you don't look like everybody else, and what you have to deal with from again.
And I mean, you're also dealing with language issues and
all of the above. Even with heating your food up in the lounge, it probably doesn't smell right, and the comments that you get, right?
So I know you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what are the recommendations from the ANA? What are your personal recommendations to alleviate the shortage of nurses and healthcare professionals we have in general? If this is a worldwide issue,
yeah,
as much as it is a US issue, where does the solution lie?
Well, thanks for asking that question. We actually just completed a think tank of professionals from nurses and non-nurses, HR, CEOs, CFOs to figure this out, exactly what you just asked. And we had a moonshot to put on the table some short-term solutions, things that can be done now, not things that can be done 5 years from now, 3 years from now, but things that can be done now to help at least with stopping the bleeding, if you will, and putting a tourniquet on these issues. And we have recommendations that fall in 6 buckets, a care delivery model that's different, a healthy work environment, dealing with stress injury and mental health issues, total compensation, work flexibility, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because we maintain that to help address the gaps that we have with our nursing workforce, we have to make this nursing profession more inclusive and more diverse. It doesn't make sense that we only have 10% of our nurses that are nurses of color, right? It's predominantly a white female profession that we have to change urgently. So we have a think tank list of recommendations that's very specific by role in terms of what leaders and nurses can do and non-nurses can do. And also some of our folks in administrative positions and legislative positions and politicians to address this issue, because we feel that this is an all hands on deck issue.
Well, Kate, I really, really appreciate the perspective. It adds a lot of a tangible nature to what we were discussing previously. So I want to take the opportunity to flip this back around and get back onto like the policy front and see what some changes we can talk about. And Ted, I'm going to turn our attention to you and your role with Forward. I know you spoke about Forward in your in your introduction, but as you said, it's a new entrant. It's from 2013. What is the mission of this organization and how does it differ from the chamber, and what's really like the focus of your organized efforts to address immigration issues?
Thank you. Appreciate that. So it's funny you asked me that question about the chamber because at one time I worked for an organization that was in opposition to the chamber. So I find myself on the side of the chamber this time around. So it feels good to be working together instead of in opposition to the chamber. So, but
you saw the light, Ted. You saw the light.
But I think we're similar to the chamber in that we approach this not only from a human-based, more from a moral standpoint and a human-based standpoint, but we also approach this from an economic standpoint, right? Like we know that there are bills and there's solutions out there and that there are policy solutions out there. There are a lot of smart people, staffers, members working on the Hill who, see this, see what's happening back home and talk to the people who are directly impacted and talk to employers, right? And they come up with solutions. But like John sort of alluded to earlier, there's a lack of courage, right? We pride ourselves on being a bipartisan organization. So I talk to Democrats and Republicans at the state level and the federal level. And what's frustrating for me, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the policy solutions that we've supported, that we continue to support. But what's frustrating for me in this entire conversation is that, when I meet with individual lawmakers or their staff, they tell me all the time, like, I'm with you. Like, I get it. I understand it. Like, I give them the data. Like, I show them where, like, it could be impactful in their district. But then we all know that, when they leave or when the meeting's over, they can't, support me publicly because they're going to get, a lot of heat, from, somebody on the radio or somebody on TV, right? They're going to get a lot of phone calls flooded to their office. And that's what actually killed comprehensive reform back in 2007, literally the night before, like we were actually getting ready to write the bill with the judiciary staff. And then we get a call saying, no, you can stop that, right? And so, there are solutions that we're working on. You just have to find the courage to support that. But just to give you sort of a sense, John, of like, the things that are out there. And, I just want to sort of speak to some of the issues that were brought up, like, the green card backlog and, the nursing shortage and things like that. I can, give you, for example, Zoe Lofgren from California, right? She introduced the Jumpstart Act, which would reduce the green card backlog, right? And it's actually, a standalone version of the recapture and cap exemption provisions that were in the BBB, in the House version of BBB. But we all know what happens with BBB, right? Like it's stalled in the Senate and it's not going anywhere, right? But, and so that's part of my frustration, right? Like, the solution's there, but, we get to the Senate and then it dies down, right? But then, other bills that we worked on in the past that address the nursing shortage, right? Senator Durbin and Senator John Cornyn from Texas introduced the Healthcare Workforce Resilience Act, I think it's called, which would recapture old wasted green cards for doctors and nurses, right? And and those can be added to the list. Added to the pile of available green cards for folks. There's the Comrade Reauthorization Act, right, which would expedite the ability of foreign-born doctors to finish their training here in the United States. There's the America Competes Act, right, which was passed by the House in February, which exempts certain international graduates with STEM backgrounds from numerical limits on green cards and would extend eligibility for special immigrant status to certain STEM experts who work directly on issues of need like national security and things like that, right? And those, we support including those provisions,
Well, that one's interesting because the Senate passed a similar version last year, but that one is the only one I think might have a shot of going somewhere. I don't know what your opinion is, but they got to do reconciliation and vote before the midterms. I think we're running out of runway. I don't know, Ted.
I had to answer that question. I'd be making a lot more money like John, right? I wish, but I mean, I agree. At one point we did feel good about it, but like, everything, especially when you talk about immigration, right? When you get to that moment where like you have to take the final vote or like you have to, vote on a motion or recommit or something like, that, those members, are hearing those phone calls in the back of their head, and like, they don't want to see their name in an ad, coming across, what I mean? So and this, I can go on and on about other possible, policy solutions, but this is like, just a couple things that we've worked on, in the last couple of years to try to like, decrease the backlog, get potential employees here, but it's just really a matter of, finding that courage and finding the political will to, to do the right thing, right? And so until then, like we'll continue to pump out these bills. We'll continue to partner with folks like the chamber to push these solutions. But I don't know, like everyone who works in DC knows three numbers: 2, 18, 51, and 60, and like getting to those numbers right now are pretty hard on some of the policy provisions that we support. So.
And Ted, I'm sorry to cut you off, John, but
please, go
ahead. What it boils down to, the lack of courage, it is inextricably intertwined to the lack of trust that Republicans have for Democrats and vice versa. Neither side trusts the other one to ever follow through on what they say they're going to do. And I asked my friends that they were on Capitol Hill when I was there. They're still there. Like, they tell me, John, it has gotten so much worse since you were here. And I say to myself, like, it wasn't that good when I was there to begin with. It boggles my mind. Like, these staffers that are on House Judish and Senate Judish, like, they don't really take time to get to know their colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And, they just don't talk. Like, it's not like you got to be besties with these people, but go to coffee. I mean, I don't drink coffee, but like, go get some breakfast together. Sit down and talk.
Play in the softball tournament.
Something, anything. But it's not happening.
And it's interesting because you guys keep alluding to your experiences with comprehensive immigration reform, 2007, 2013. Day one of the Biden administration, we had a comprehensive immigration reform bill that is probably holding up a table leg somewhere. But there's been all these efforts. My question is there really a move away from saying we can't do this all at once? Like, I know Forward, when it came out, was saying if we galvanize the business community and we take the passion of the immigration advocates dealing with the individuals and the migrants, and we combine this, we can really push something forward. No pun intended. But it seems like those efforts are being sidestepped or pushed to a side to have individual bills being pushed forward on specific topics that maybe have a better chance of passing, or I don't know. What do you guys think?
John, I think, go ahead, Ted. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, I just think, you get the individual bills, right? Because people get frustrated because of the lack, of passage of comprehensive immigration reform. And so it puts, our organization forward in a position where, we want to do something, right? And like, we don't just want to do anything, right? But like, if there's a bill moving that could protect, I don't know, 3 million DACA recipients, or 5 million TPS recipients, or a million H-1B visa applicants, like we're gonna support that, right? Not that we lose sight of what we're fighting for, but like any opportunity, especially in this particular environment, to get something passed is a victory, and we always jump on top of that. So go ahead, John.
To me, to get back to your original question about like, is comprehensive reform, is that DOA? Yeah. I mean, to me, I think a lot of the folks on the Hill that I talked to at the beginning of the Biden administration was like, there's no way this bill can move. When it came out, we said nice things about it because it had nice things in it. And if it was something where there was a willingness upon Democrats that this is where we started, we understand this is not going to be the be all and end all, let's negotiate. It was just like, there's never, Republican administrations are guilty of this too. When you had Tom Cotton and Dave Perdue do their RAISE Act, they're like, yeah, we're going to cut legal immigration, period, full stop. It's like, this is ridiculous. But there's, you have a situation where you have they're like polar opposites. One wants more, the other wants less. The best that you can hope for is to like break even and just move the deck chairs around. I would hope that once the passions die down, you start realizing we are having a situation economically where businesses across the country can't meet their workforce needs. We need to get real about right-sizing immigration system. And the other thing is it's like, I don't know if it's just cognitive dissonance or it's just ignoring the inconvenient facts as you're trying to make your point. But you can raise levels of legal immigration And you know what that effect would tend to have if you actually do this in the long term? Like all the programs that we talk about, a guest worker program for non-seasonal workers, really reforming H-2A, really reforming H-2B, having high-skilled temporary worker programs at work, having enough capacity in the employment-based immigration system with more than 140,000 visas each year, where more than half of them go to the spouses and children of the principal immigrant. Like those types of changes, yes, you're going to have more legal immigration, but you'll probably have less illegal immigration if you do this in the long term.
Yeah.
And there's just never a recognition of that fact. It's like they're two silos, they're completely separate, and just making more legal immigration available is not going to do anything to stop illegal immigration. Right. And it's what puts more gray hair in my beard every day.
And Ted, I'd like to talk a little bit about your specific challenge. I know you alluded to it, but you are in Florida, which has a very dynamic reality with immigration. You have wild numbers of migrants coming in from Latin America in particular that settle in this particular region. You have a conservative governor, you have a conservative legislature. And I know immigration is, frankly, for the most part, federal in nature, but there's a state aspect to your organization and what you're trying to do. Can you talk a little bit about that dynamic?
Definitely. So like I mentioned, at the beginning, we started doing state work back in 2018. It also happened to coincide at the same time that Governor DeSantis was elected, right? And so he ran a pretty staunch anti-immigrant campaign, and he won. And the GOP also has control of our state Senate and our state House. And so there's complete GOP control here in Florida. Now, I say that, and I have to add this caveat. Despite GOP control of Florida over the last maybe 20 plus 30 years, we've actually had immigrant-friendly bills come through the state of Florida. Like we have a tuition equity bill that passed through the state of Florida, right? And so, and that was signed by Rick Scott, right? When he was governor, right? And so, I don't want to equate the entire GOP with anti-immigrant, rhetoric or policy, right? But DeSantis has been pretty staunch in his anti-immigrant, policies and proposals and comments, right? And here in Florida, the way our system is set up, the governor has a lot of power. He has line item veto power, and so he has the ability to wield his influence, right? And so from the start, we've been dealing with bad bills, right? We fought a sanctuary city bill that's now being held up in court because it's ruled unconstitutional by the District Court of Appeals down here in Florida. They did an E-Verify bill, which was opposed dramatically by the business community down here in Florida. And that also presents some tricks within itself, right? Because John can tell you, like, the business community not only has to handle, balance immigration issues, but they have to balance other business issues, right? And so it's like, where do I pick my fight, and how do I pick my fight, and where do I fight, right? And so there's that aspect of it, right? And then we also, most recently, this past legislative session, fought this horrible bill, SB 1808, which, they tried to politicize the border like they always do. And, it was a pledge from the governor to stop doing business with any company that, that flew, undocumented children into the state of Florida, right? And so we're sort of used to the barrage of anti-immigrant rhetoric, but, we also have the ability down here in the state of Florida to work behind closed doors with a lot of our leaders, right? And to actually get some things done, like I mentioned, like the tuition equity bill. But even at the local level, we work with some leaders to get things like, community IDs as well too, and so I just think really, it varies from state to state, right? Because my counterparts in Colorado and New York, they passed the driver's license bill on behalf of undocumented persons, right? And now they're implementing those policies. Whereas, my colleagues in Texas and Georgia, are sort of like me, where we're sort of pushing back bad bills. And I don't know if you guys remember the bill SB4 from maybe 5 years ago down in Texas, what I mean? So it's just, it's a barrage of anti-immigrant policies, but I think what it has done, and I think John can also speak to this as a Florida person, right? It's created this grassroots community down here of immigrant advocates who have been fighting these battles for the last 20, 30 plus years. And, I think, that grassroots effort has really stymied, some of the worser instincts of some of our leaders in Tallahassee, right? I think we saw that this past session where, you saw a collection of Pan refugees and the religious community come out against some of the policies that the that the governor was pushing, you know, and so that's why we're big here at Forward on just sort of narrative building, right? Reminding people that, you know, 2-3 generations ago, this was you, right? This was your parents, this was your grandparents, right? You know, and so, you know, aside from just sort of fighting back against some of the bad stuff, we also push for good stuff, right? So we're pushing for a driver's license bill down here in Florida, right? We're pushing, you know, for not only tuition equity, but access to financial aid for undocumented immigrants as well, too. I mean, there's a host of things that you can do to bring people out of the shadows. I mean, it only benefits our economy. You know, I mean, you know, giving someone a license, you know, and we don't have a good transportation system down here in Florida, anywhere in Florida, not any city, not Orlando, not Jacksonville, not Miami, right? But giving someone a license so they can drive 30, 40 minutes to work only benefits everybody in the long run, right? Like, you know, you got to purchase a car, you have to purchase gas, right? And like makes you more mobile, right? And so really,
sorry, that's a good question. Somebody said, what's a Peter Pan refugee? By the way, you referenced that.
So Peter Pan, that refers to the group of Cuban children immigrants who came here in the 60s. You know, it was, you know, they came here as kids, you know, they were escaping the Fidel Castro regime. And, you know, they're maybe 70 years old now because they were, you know, 5-10 years old back in the 60s. And, you know, they were the beginning of the exile community that we have here in Florida. And, you know, I mean, if anyone who's ever been to Miami knows, you know, the, you know, tremendous contributions that the Cuban American community has made. You know, our mayor is Cuban, you know, I mean, our board of commissioner, everyone down here, you know, has strong ties to the Cuban community. So, yeah, you know what I mean? So the actual visual, right, of like these 65, 70-year-old men who came here as kids themselves, standing up for the kids now currently at the southern border, you know, trying to come in, was something that really, I guess, for lack of a better word, bothered the governor, right? And it actually forced him to come down here and actually defend himself. He actually had to have a competing press conference with his own Peter Pan refugees, trying to say, no, this is actually a good bill. We should be able to prevent undocumented kids from coming to Florida and reuniting with their families. So, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, really, like I said, it goes from state to state. You know, I think everyone's here smart enough to figure out which states are a little more friendlier to immigrants than others. But, you know, even in states where, you know, we do a lot of fighting back, you know, we're able to at least be a resource, you know, for a lot of these communities. So,
yeah, you know, and I really do appreciate that. And one of the things that I've been thinking about as we've been listening to this session, and you mentioned it in your opening remarks, Ted, was this idea like, you know, historically, or maybe it was John, but like historically, we bring the immigration car back into the shed, we tune it up a little bit, we have a bill, and then we move forward. One of the things that we've alluded to are these quota numbers, whether it be quotas for immigrant visas, quotas for H-1Bs, quotas for temporary seasonal workers. And it's this somewhat, at this point, arbitrary number that's just picked out through a congressional act that we're sort of stuck with. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we know which industries have a shortage of workers with specific numbers. We know which regions of the country, we know which states. Why, or is Forward or is Commerce looking at a mechanism for allocation of work authorization that's driven by more statistical data? So to say, you know what, we have 1.9% unemployment in the tech sector. Let's open up 80,000 H-1Bs for that sector. You know what, there's 10% unemployment in the marketing sector. No H-1Bs this year. How come we're not getting smarter in applying the statistical data that we have to our direct immigration needs? And
John,
that's just an open question.
We tried doing this in 2013. I know we did it with the adjustable caps that we had, particularly for the H-1B program, where we included the JOLTS data. So
Yeah.
like, listen, tell us where the job openings, losses, and transfers are, and we can adjust the cap accordingly for that. It's something that having more real-time data influence how many visas we issue. And it's not something that just opens up and then just stays open. It's something that, like, all right, as the economy is humming, more visas should be available. If the economy starts to, you know, head south, and not in a good way, you know, you'd see the number of visas being made available shrink. And you can see this in the way the visa system operates.
Yeah, well, it's natural. I mean,
you saw it in 2009, 2010, when, you know, the housing bubble burst and the Great Recession hit. You saw numbers of H-1Bs go down, number of H-2Bs go down. and slowly but surely it would grow. And now you basically see it in how, like when it comes to the H-1B registration system, how many more people are registering than when the cap, what the cap is. Like you got roughly 400.
You're plus 400K this year.
Yeah, you're at so 85,000, about 480,000. You literally every 6 people that apply, only 1 gets through.
Yeah,
that's not having a situation where supply actually meets demand. We can have a
well, and Ted, I look at somewhere like Florida, which has like a massively growing tech sector, entrepreneurship. It's really humming. Like, what's the chatter down there on supporting immigrant investors, inventors, entrepreneurs?
So, like you mentioned, we do have a huge tech industry down here, and that tech industry was actually started by a lot of immigrants. Somebody that jumps to mind real quick is Gianna Mocola, who founded an organization called WinCode, which teaches kids how to code, right? And it's located in the inner city of Miami, and it's accessible to everyone, right? I think going back to your earlier question, we at Forward have always advocated for doubling the cap. Just from an economic perspective, like that would be the most beneficial. And I don't have the numbers, like, how much the economy would grow if we did that. But like, we have been staunch advocates of doing exactly that. But like you alluded to, like not only in the tech industry down here in Florida, but, going back to what Katie said, we have a huge elderly population down here in Florida that everyone's aware of, right? And like, the lack of like at-home nursing aides, we're sort of feeling that impact down here as well too. So, and the other industries, like I mentioned earlier at the start of my at the start of this conversation, hospitality, ag, construction, like all these industries, are experiencing a shortage and could use, and use more folks. So I think, you have an appetite for folks down here in the advocacy community, obviously, but also in the tech industry and these different industries to do something. And to fight for something. They just need direction, right? And so this is why I'm always telling folks, I need you to call this senator, I need you to flood this person's phone line, I need you, to, write a letter to the editor, or I need you to use your platform as a leader in the tech industry, to advocate for, this particular policy, whatever, because honestly, it's one thing for me to speak up, I'm a political operative, for lack of a better word, right? But like, when it directly impacted people that you mentioned, like the tech industry down here, start talking, people listen, right? And I think, there's a desire to want to do something, but then I think folks get frustrated, right? Like I direct people, I say, make a call, right? And then they make a call and then nothing happens afterwards, right? Because Congress sits on stuff and sits on bills, right? Nothing ever gets voted out. And so,
well, it's really hard to like line up a bunch of protesters to hold signs that say we need H-1B visa reform so that nurses can fill our hospital. It just doesn't fit well on a protest line.
Well, the other thing too is the
I was just going to flip it over to you for some final remarks.
Because the rhetoric has gotten in the way, it seems, right? And I think because we're in such an environment where information is coming at us so fast, people are not really taking the time to learn and really understand how things connect. They see a lot of things as disparate issues. It's similar to us trying to make the case to consumers that a nursing shortage issue is your issue. It's a public health issue because any one of us at any point could need healthcare services any day. And the worst thing that could happen to you, or one of the worst things, is you can't go to your local hospital because they don't have any staff beds, right? It's not just about the physical beds, it's the beds that can be staffed. So then you have delayed care, which impacts your outcomes because they have to take you to another hospital that's miles away from where you live. So isn't it part of it also helping people connect the dots, right? Where, there's the way people used to absorb information is not the way things are today, where you would take the time to read a newspaper and really understand an issue. Now it's just, a tweet and you think you got it and you have a position. It's a comment that someone's made, a soundbite, and you think you cement your position versus really learning and understanding how it connects to everyday life and make decisions, not necessarily because of where you should line up based on your political party, but it's really about how it impacts you as a human being and how it impacts your family.
And, with that, I would like to say thank you to our panelists. Hopefully this panel, for those that were in attendance, helped connect some of those dots, as Katie alluded to. Hopefully we can see that this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is a bipartisan issue. This is an American issue. This is the future of our workforce. This is the future of our country. And I think, yes, we talked about the cause, we talked about the effect, but I really want to thank our panelists for actually offering some solutions. And hopefully dialogues like this can drive the discussion forward and we can get some meaningful change. So I'd like to thank you for joining us for this free webinar. We could have talked out probably for another hour or so on a variety of other issues, but we'd really like to express our gratitude to this esteemed group of panelists. You guys are doing amazing work. Please keep it up. And thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to share your expertise with our group. The section of Civil Rights and Social Justice provides free webinars and resources for legal professionals and advocates nationwide. We hope this helps you in your work. And again, if you please, if you can, please consider joining and becoming an active member of the ABA. There's a lot of good that you can do through advocacy, and I hope today helped prove it. Everybody stay safe, and thank you again for joining us.